Now, the Greens held their national conference in Western Australia over the weekend. Leader Bob Brown joins us now to talk about the budget surplus or deficit and other issues. Bob Brown, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning.
Are you in agreement with the Federal Treasurer Wayne Swan that the budget will be returned to surplus as forecast for 2012-13, and do you believe that it matters?
Well, it'd be good for the government if it is returned to surplus, and that always looks good. But I think it's very important that we keep the supply of money going to government services. I think it's very important that we not be panicked and the government not be panicked by Tony Abbott into slashing services, putting public servants out of work, cutting health or education or whatever else, just to meet a budget line when we've got a $400 billion budget, and whether it comes in $1 billion up or $1 billion down is not going to matter near so much as the importance of appearing to have a steady hand on the tiller and keeping those services going at a time when the country is really doing quite well.
One rather credible report this morning seems to suggest that if cuts are being looked at by the federal government, and Wayne Swan has confirmed that he is doing that, excuse me, that health actually might be one of the areas that is particularly targeted for some savings to be found. What would be the Greens' view of that particular part of government business being focused on?
Well, we wouldn't take we'd take a dim view of cutting health services. We've had our national conference on the weekend, which is promoting the idea of bringing in national Denticare to match Medicare over the coming years. That's part of a government commitment in the last budget to have that as a growing item in the next budget so that people do have adequate access to getting dental health care in Australia. It saves a lot of money in the long run, and it's just the sort of innovation that we need to see as we take up the responsibility of giving guaranteed health care to all Australians. Cutting the budget's not going to help that, of course.
Well, indeed, and you in fact picked a very difficult time for, as a party, as part of your party platform, to be backing an idea that many do agree with you, Bob Brown, yes, that it is an important part of healthcare and that is some sort of national dental care scheme. There's been government after government that has to confront this issue, hasn't dealt with it, hasn't put in place a plan. Can you really be optimistic or even realistic about that being put in place now, when the budget is under such pressure and we're looking at perhaps another global economic downturn?
Well, yes, we can. And in fact, I repeat, the Australian economy is going well. We do support the government's mining tax. In fact, we support the Treasury recommended super profits tax. And if the government were to collect that, it would have an extra $100 billion over the next decade. And that would be more than adequate to, amongst other things, bring in the national dental health care system we're talking about. On the other side of the ledger, we have Tony Abbott, who doesn't want to collect the carbon revenues, who doesn't want to collect the mining tax, who'd have us $140 billion down beyond the Treasury recommended model over the next 10 years. All I can see there with the opposition is not only failing to bring in adequate dental health care, but cutting jobs, thousands of jobs out of the public service, and cutting government services, including health and education and other services right across the board. And we don't think that's responsible at a time we still have a mining boom.
Sure.
This country is going extraordinarily well, and we need the revenue from that boom to ensure that we have good services, including for health and public education, for example, in the coming years.
I just want to quickly, before we have to move on rather quickly to other subjects, but just to clarify this issue of Denticare, is this a policy area that the Greens are going to make a condition of your support for the government? Is it that important to you?
Well, the development of dental care, health care, universal health care, is part of the arrangement we made with government. It was an explicit commitment in Treasurer Wayne Swan's budget speech of this year for next year And yes, we will be pursuing the adequate funding of a national dental health care system, phased in, of course, over the next 5 years or so.
Let me turn to just another matter that was a topic of heated discussion during that conference, and that's the issue of preferences. The Labor Party in some seats actually preferencing Liberal Party candidates over Greens. Isn't Labor's desire to do just that, to preference the Greens out of particular seats by doing those deals with some Liberals, just an indication of how bullying it probably finds having a minority government partnership with the Greens? They really want to be able to be rid of your influence. Isn't that what that indicates?
Yeah, both the big parties are stuck on majoritarian politics. They can only see themselves as being the supremos in government, but of course
well, it's often because they're held hostage to some minority views and they feel it's rather unfair.
Well, replace the words held hostage with the word enriched. Well, for example, we've just been talking about dental health care. It's the Greens that have got that on the agenda, as high-speed rail, for example. And we're pursuing, I can tell you, better funding for Asian languages, something that the New South Wales Premier is talking about. These are things that the Greens are putting on the agenda that both the big parties have failed to do. It is enriching to have more than just two parties who look more and more alike over recent decades, jostling for government, and we wouldn't have this terrific breakthrough of the carbon package, which is going to be good for this country's economy and jobs as well as for the environment as we go down the line, if it weren't for the Greens. So we see that the Greens are enriching the thought stream, the creativity, the injection of good ideas for Australia into this political environment, and people like it. That's why we're growing in popularity.
Do the Greens share the same reluctance and fears over Australia contributing more to the IMF as the coalition does?
No, we do want to be globally responsible. That's one of the things that we did like about this budget, and Kevin Rudd's in charge here, is the increase in overseas aid, because that does lead to a more secure planet. And if we want to be economically secure, we also have to play our role in the global economic environment, Virginia. And we are, amongst Western democracies, one of those that's doing well. But on the other hand, in the global arena, it's the Greens who are calling for our troops to be brought home from Afghanistan. I see an opinion poll, the Morgan poll, over the weekend showing that there's been an enormous lift, 30% increase to over 70% of Australians now want our troops brought home, and we would agree with that, while providing increased aid to the Afghani people to get on and shape the future of their own country themselves.
Bob Brown, good to talk to you this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Virginia.